What you want wants you back. Now, this is the further discussion on the concept of self-image based, embodying the ideal self-image based conversations we've been having over the last handful of videos. And in the last video, I spoke of the concept of mental alchemy. And the way I see it is rearranging the mind and having reality reflect, or the outer world reflect, the rearrangement of the mind. Now, much of this rearrangement of the mind is changing the concept of self, our self-image. And our goal is to affirm the self-image that is in harmony with the vision. Now, it's not just one vision, but really a lot of things that are related to that concept of self. There's a saying, everywhere you go, there you are. And I want to share with you a specific story of my entrepreneurial journey. So in 2007, I had gotten out of debt. As many of you know, I've worked with the concept of autosuggestion from Think and Grow Rich in 2004 when I was in $50,000 debt, and I used the material to not only get myself out of debt, but to buy my first house and then transition me into business and entrepreneurship in 2009. But in 2007, I was already changing as a result of working with the information, my self-image. I was allowing my entrepreneurial aspects to shine and be brought to the surface. And I would see it in how I was behaving and the different experiences that I was having. However, I did not embody it to such a high degree until I felt I no longer resonated with the corporate world and left, and then really began to embody this concept of self that we would call entrepreneur, this identity. Now, what ended up happening was in 2007, I noticed that there was these two Lamborghinis, a yellow Lamborghini and a black one that was parked in the parking lot. And those cars belonged to the office building next door. So we had these twin towers, and the other building had these, in the parking lot, these Lamborghinis. And I wanted to know, during that time I was very curious because I wanted to connect with people that were doing well. Because during that time I wanted to figure out how people got the results. Some of you might actually know there's a book called The Millionaire Fast Lane by M.J. DeMarco. In this book that he talks about how he was figuring out how people were earning a large amount of disposable income, and he was trying to reverse engineer or figure out what they were doing so he could replicate it. So I had that same way of thinking. And one day when I was driving back from lunch, from work, I noticed that he was parked, one of the owners of the Lamborghini, or so I thought he was the owner, was parked in a parking lot right beside. There was a coffee shop, and he was sitting in the parking lot having a cup of coffee and reading the newspaper in the car with the top down. It's a yellow Lamborghini convertible. So I pulled up beside him, and I started talking to him, and I noticed a few things. Number one was the way he was communicating. It was different compared to the other people that I would normally surround myself with or that I was around. I started to notice how he would say things from a place of opportunity, abundance, and just all around what we would call prosperity consciousness. But it was very apparent in his choice of words and his communication and his confidence, and you felt it. I started to then recognize that from Neville's work, I was allowing myself to embody more of that consciousness that was within me, that was awakening as a result of working with this information. And then at a certain point, he said, "What do you do?" And I said, I'm working in this company right next door, and right now I'm on this extensive project with warehouse management systems and wireless networks and things like that. And he said, "Wow, very interesting." He's like, "What do you know about tracking devices?" And I said, "Well, I don't know much about it, but I can figure it out. I've always figured things out." He's like, "We could probably use your help if you're interested." And he started talking about his business. So what they did was they imported and exported cars, and a lot of them were exotic cars from Europe and Russia. And then when he gave me his business card, it was actually a Russian phone number on it. It wasn't a Canadian phone number. So he said to me, "Look, why don't you come by the office? Let's talk, and maybe you could help us with some stuff." So right then and there, I had the opportunity to go down that direction. He literally offered me a job or offered me a position or a consulting gig or something. And I remember going back to the office and carrying with me that state of mind. But then I remember also engaging in conversations about the person that I connected with, and then hearing people say things that were doubtful. And so my own doubts were playing out as theater. So as much as I was aiming to embody the certain consciousness, I also noticed that I wasn't embodying it to that high of a degree because it would play out in theater as people affirming certain other doubts I had about going down the entrepreneurial journey. So what ended up happening was I got out of that state of mind. So I didn't follow his instructions of what he said, but instead I called his office and started asking these questions. I came off a little bit as needy, desperate, and behaving differently. That wasn't related to the state of mind in which I met him. Now, what ended up happening was, for whatever the reason may be, he was difficult to get a hold of all of a sudden after that. And his admin and someone on his team would appear to give me a runaround. Now, I realized that I was the creator of all of these experiences based on the level of embodiment of my self-image. On the one hand, I'm bringing forth opportunities, but on the other hand, I was doubting them. Indecision that was playing out as theater in how I was relating with those opportunities. Now, that is totally fine because I ended up going down the direction and building my IT business and having the opportunities and so forth to do what I wanted to do financially. But the main thing about that was the reflection on that experience. And that's what I want to weave into this discussion. See, we can bring forth a result, whatever it may be, or even steps towards a result, and then again forget about these valuable pieces of ideas that are being conveyed in these messages from Neville and the other discussions that we do that bring us back into other states of mind, the same old concept of self, rather than further affirming and embodying the new concept of self. Now, fast forward after embodying this entrepreneur for many years, 11 years now, since 2009 I've been doing it. I noticed that it's easy for me to do sales, to put deals together, to have conversations with other entrepreneurs, put two and two together, follow through, see things all the way to completion, not have doubts and hesitations, but higher degrees of clarity, know what to do, when not to do, when to act and when not to act. And that's because of the embodiment of that self-image. Now, all of us do this, whether it is a conscious choice of a self-image or past concepts of self, previous self-images. We're doing this automatically. So what we want is conscious practice. Now, we're going to relate what I just shared into the conversation. And Neville states, the conscious mind forms beliefs and opinions from the evidence of the senses or the perceived outer world. The creative power within each of us accepts as true that which the conscious mind impresses upon it. Your creative power takes those ideas, which are thought of with feeling, and projects them in your outer world. It is important to remember that not all thoughts are creative. Only those which are believed to be true, or which are joined with the feeling, create the circumstances and events that you will encounter. So if you take a philosophy, and we talked in the last video about how you will discover your own philosophy, and you embody your philosophy, you live your philosophy, you'll start to notice signs or things changing in the outer world to reflect your philosophy. That's because this creative power within takes the idea or the elements within the philosophy and begins to express itself in ways that we might not consciously know, but we see it when we have the experience. Now, during the experience, we can either fully embody it, step into it, embrace it, or we can find ourselves not worthy of it for whatever the reason may be. Now, based on my experience of that circumstance, I realized that it wasn't necessarily that I wasn't worthy or deserved of having those opportunities. Heck, their whole business model is about importing and exporting these exotic cars, and the members of their team are driving these exotic cars as part of the business. During that time, I was into exotic cars. And then not only that, I had the opportunity to work with entrepreneurs and learn different aspects about business. Now, that ended up happening later on in my journey. I had those opportunities. But those opportunities were presented earlier, and I could have maintained that state of mind and actually worked with those opportunities earlier, all by really understanding what this quote means. Now, what it means is opinions and beliefs about yourself have changed as a result of embodying the information. And as a result of the beliefs and opinions about yourself changing, the outer world changes and presents itself way more opportunities. So these days, I get way more opportunities like that than I could possibly ever deal with. But in those days, they were once-in-a-while based opportunities. That's because of the embodiment of a chosen concept of self. He says, first we must be like the watchman at the gate. We must watch every thought that contains I am. If you are observant, you will see that you have created every circumstance and experience of your life. We might not be conscious as to what we are saying I am to, but we want to bring conscious awareness, as we spoke about in the last video. We start off usually by working with this information from unconscious incompetence, and we want to eventually move into unconscious competence. Watch that video discussion. I'll put the link in the description. But we want to bring more awareness from the clues, the signs, and the synchronicities, and understand the meaning behind them. And what we'll find is that we are saying I am to things. I am this opportunity. I am the person that is in that certain experience. I feel comfortable in that experience. That is me, and what I want wants me back because that's in relation to my self-image. For example, I had a conversation with a client who recently purchased this new BMW. And one of the things that he said to me is that he feels sometimes uncomfortable driving this car. And I said, why is that? He says, well, I see myself as an executive and so forth in his career, but I'm not there yet as far as where my career is. And I said to him, I said, how do you know that this is not part of the journey to the fulfillment of it? Perhaps the reason why you might not feel comfortable in that car is you don't feel like you're worth driving that car. The truth is that if you have the car is you. So now all we have to do is step into it, represent that car, and you'll start to notice even other things changing in your life. You'll start to notice that you may get even more opportunities and ideas to advance your career. A lot of times we think that when we get to the destination, that's when we can have everything that we want to have. And it's only until we get to that destination that we can have everything that we want to have. But the truth is this, is that the journey is as rewarding as the destination. And if you embrace the different elements that you have brought forth on the journey to the destination, then those elements that you brought forth are part of the embodiment to that destination. For example, in my entrepreneurial journey, when I started embracing entrepreneurship a lot more, I found myself around more successful entrepreneurs. And I felt a little bit uncomfortable around them in the beginning because they were so wise and they had this success and it seemed like radical amount of success. And many people that I was around at the time would dream to have that level of success. What I then started to notice was I allowed myself to accept myself to be around them. I recognized that what I want wants me back. And as a result of allowing myself to accept this new concept of self, or the forming concept of self, by being around them, I started to embrace that consciousness within me that was externalizing as them, playing out the theater of the journey to the destination. So what ended up happening then was I started to notice that there was changes in my business, changes in the income level, changes in the success. And it was because I was continuously maintaining the identity by recognizing that I was deserved for all the things that showed up in relation to my vision that I was receiving on the way to the destination, and not necessarily saying that when I get to the destination, I'm going to have these kinds of friends and certain kinds of experiences that would represent that success. So when he says we must be like a watchman at the gate and observe what we are saying I am to, the question then becomes, are we saying I am to the very elements that show up on the journey that we are creating from within consciously and working with this information to create when they show up, or are we further pushing them away, saying, I am not that? And we're doing this very subtly, subconsciously. Now, why is this the case? Well, Neville speaks of a concept called the sea of ideas. He says each of us is subject to a sea of ideas. We listen to the radio, watch the news on television, or hear some gossip. If what we observe calls forth an emotion, we have reacted and thereby planted a seed which will sprout at some future time. Thoughts do not recede into the past, rather they advance into the future to confront us so that we may see that which we have planted, either wisely or unwisely. So we're planting seeds everywhere we go. And these seeds are going into the subconscious and expressing themselves on the different experiences and circumstances on our life. And what we want to do is change the concept of self so that the automatic expression of the concept of self, the identity, is what we would like to see in a multidimensional way in relation to what we want and all the attributes in relation to what you want. Take, for example, my client. He wants that end result. He's actually already on the journey to the destination. I've seen a lot of change in him over the months, and he's moving in that destination. He's bringing forth certain success in his life. And genuinely, sometimes we don't recognize this, as I didn't recognize it back in the day, is if it shows up or something relates to it that shows up, we say, I am not that, subconsciously. And what we want to is recognize that and say, I am worth it, or I am deserving of this, or I am this. Because for him, the person that is at that vision is driving that car. It is a worthwhile exercise, he says, to awaken in the morning and imagine yourself at the end of your day having accomplished all that you wanted and feeling happy and contented. If there is a situation that you will encounter later in the day that is of concern to you, spend a few moments imagining the outcome you wish to experience. These imaginal activities will now advance into your future to reveal your harvest you so wisely planted. So we have the power to work with imagination, and we have the power to say, what are we saying I am to on the day-to-day experiences as a result of previous things that we have been imagining? And what we want to do is say I am to the things that show up that are in relation to the vision, and we'll start to notice that we will move forward with those opportunities or represent them. Now, we're going to relate this to the concept of selling or business dealing, because that's very much in harmony with what I brought up in that story earlier, as well as working with this client. So Neville says, that which is confronting you in your world now is a result of your past thoughts, beliefs, feelings, and imaginal activity. These appearances will continue in being as long as you give them life through your conscious awareness of them. You must disregard the evidence of your senses as it pertains to any undesirable condition in your life. You must imagine and feel that you already have attained that which you want to experience rather than that which you do not want to continue in being. This may appear difficult, yet you have probably exercised this principle unconsciously to produce negative results, or as we stated, positive results. But one of the reasons why it doesn't seem to be consistent and it seems to fluctuate over to negative and positive is because we're not changing the other attributes that are in relation to the self-image, the concept of self. A person can work with this information and bring forth some success, only to lose it again because they have not changed the concept of self. So because we focus a lot on entrepreneurship and sales and career on this channel, we're going to talk about how to relate this in objections/rejections to revise, using Neville's principle of revision, to further evolve the concept of self. So this is a concept of self-based revision. So here are some potential internal conflicts that we might have, and they may even play out as theater when we're doing business deals, such as, it is too expensive. I need to use this money somewhere else. We're already working with someone else. I can get a cheaper version somewhere else. There's too much going on right now. I've never heard of your company. It's just not important right now. These objections or rejections can show up on the journey when we are doing business deals or when we're doing sales. Some of you have noticed that you have seen these objections and rejections. But have we in that moment recognized that it relates to the concept of self? And how we understand and interpret it is going to determine how we respond to it or understand how it really is in relation to the vision. For example, if you make a proposition to a prospect and they say, it's too expensive, or if someone thinks of a Lamborghini in their mind and they're thinking, it's too expensive, what does it say about the concept of self or the self-image in relation to prosperity? It is not to say that you need to go out and buy that car, but if you see yourself deserved of whatever you want, then you wouldn't put things in a category of too expensive. It's either you want it or you don't want it. And if you want it, you're going to get it. And if you don't want it, you're not going to get it. So a revision for someone who has experienced a rejection, let's say, where they approach a prospect and they say it's too expensive. At the end of the night, they could see themselves having a conversation with the client that goes something like this. I understand that you may see it to be expensive, but I also want to recognize that the value that we provide is well worth it. Here are the different things that we do and the kind of return that we're able to bring as a result of investing in us. And that kind of conversation played in revision impresses the subconscious mind and thus further recreates those experiences from that perspective or similar like that on the day-to-day journey towards bringing success. Now, what does this also do is it changes the concept of self. It is essentially saying that what I have created or what I have put together is a value. So it's not too expensive. It's actually a fair value exchange. What you'll notice is that when you embody this fair value exchange concept of self, is that people will show up ready to exchange fair value, your product or service for their payment. Now, this is something that could also show up, let's say, if you're doing a business deal or if you are making an offer to a prospect. You say, we need to use this money somewhere else. Now, if you don't value yourself and you don't see yourself as a person of value and that you have the value to offer the other person, and one of the best ways that they can allocate resources is in your opportunity, you might just agree with them in that spot. But if you revise it, maybe with an affirmation and say, I recognize that I have infinite value. I recognize that those that show up on my journey want to invest in themselves through me via compensation to me, and in return for that, they receive my product and service in which they integrate and produce the results. Thus, they automatically realize that I am the best investment choice. What I want wants me back. What I want is fair value exchange. They receive fair value and they pay me fair value. This idea is who I am. What if they say they're already working with someone else? To a person, that may imply that they're not good enough, their product or service is not good enough. And here are two ways of looking at it. If somebody says they're working with someone else, you can say to yourself, well, they may be working with someone else, but I'm going to now, as a result of this, find the ideal client. Or you could revise it at the end of the night when they say we're working with someone else. You could say, yeah, maybe you're working with someone else, but what we have to offer is something that can benefit you in ways that the other vendor, and no disrespect to them, benefits you. And we can show you the way. If you give us a moment, we'll put together a nice presentation and we'll show you. So all these revisional acts are actually changing the concept of self. They're not tactical things, because what it's implying at a deeper level is that you already are the person of value, that you deserve what you want wants you back. So we can take any one of these objections and rejections and recognize the important truth that a lot of times when people get rejected or objected for something in sales or business dealings, they're thinking that they are not good enough. They think that the rejection is about them. The important recognition is that you are divine perfection and that nobody can reject you unless you allow yourself to be rejected. You simply have to recognize that you have the value and that people show up ready to receive the value. If one doesn't recognize that they have the value, they may end up in a situation where people don't recognize their value, and these kinds of things play out in theater. And through the revision or self-talk or the affirmations, such as the ones I provided, as well as reflecting back on the examples, you recognize what we're really focusing on is changing the concept of self and bringing yourself to a person of value. Here's another rejection a person might get when they're doing business dealings. I can get a cheaper version somewhere else. So if a person doesn't have a good, confident sense of self or a confident self-image, they're going to associate this with they're not good enough. Meanwhile, the person is actually saying, I can get a cheaper version somewhere else. And a person might be saying to themselves, I'm not good enough because I can't give them this cheaper version. The truth is, you don't have to give them a cheaper version. You give them the value that you believe is fair. If you believe it's fair, it has nothing to do with expensive or cheap, and that's the way it is. Not forceful, no confrontation, completely fair, and that's based on the concept of self. So perhaps an affirmation like this can help. I recognize that what I have is of value, and people are ready to receive the value that I provide. I charge fair value for my products and services. People are ready to receive my products and services and invest in my products and services via fair value exchange. And here are some other rejections which could be a result of certain concept of self-based elements externalizing as theater that represent that you are not worthy or you are not deserved. If they say, there's too much going on right now. I've never heard of your company. It's just not important right now. So what a person says I am too when they hear these things is going to reveal their concept of self. When they hear these things, are they saying, yeah, it's fine, I'm going to find another prospect and it's going to turn into a client? Or, that's okay, we can figure out a way to work through these things, and they have the conversation with the prospect accordingly? Or are they saying, oh, this implies that I am not good enough, that my company is not known and it's not at this higher brand level compared to another person, or I am not an important person? Again, they're taking the rejection as a rejection to their value and their worth. And we have to remember that no matter what we are taught, and again, when Neville said this earlier, why do we get this information as we are not good enough or we are not worthy? Well, going back to what Neville said in the earlier part of this conversation, it comes back to the sea of ideas. We listen to the radio, watch the news on television, or hear some gossip. And we form interpretations based on how other people are communicating with each other. And we form associations about our self-image in relation to those communications. When the truth of the matter is that you can conceive in your mind a concept of self, whatever that concept of self may be, and in your imagination and through your inner dialogue and through the affirmations or through surrounding yourself in certain environments, such as the example that I gave earlier, that are reflective of that ideal self-image, it will further affirm that self-image that you really want to embody, how you really want to see yourself be. And what you'll find is that when you have changed the concept of self to a high degree, when you've embodied it to a very high degree, if you happen to get any kinds of rejections like this, you'll happen to know what to do, what to say, and how to say it. And you won't take it personally that you are not good enough. So in grand summary, it's important to recognize that the concept of self is changing when you are seeing more things in your experiences on the day-to-day journey that represent to you how you really want to be. And as you continue to encourage those changes within you through the revision, through the self-talk, through the affirmations, through the conscious placing yourself in environments with information that further support that self-image, is that you will start to see even more changes. This is because we are actually, again, saying I am to the externalizations of what we once said I am to in our imagination. So you imagine something, you assume it is done, you see representations of it on your day-to-day journey, and you say, I am that. I am deserved of the car. I am deserved of the opportunity. If I had said, I am deserved of that opportunity, I would have gone down a different pathway. But I don't regret it because I had to go down those experiences so that I could understand, cross-reference, and practice doing it more mindfully. Through the repetition of working with this information, the concept of self has changed. So I understand where my client is on the journey. I recognize that he actually brought forth something that was in relation to the vision, but based on some interpretations, and we had the conversation of what others were saying about how to interpret the BMW, he started to validate certain concept of self elements that are not true to the true concept of self that he wants to embody, which is in relation to that vision, which is driving that car, having a certain lifestyle, being in a certain position, and leadership, and so forth. So I trust that you found this information to be valuable and not only integratable if you are in the journey of entrepreneurial success or business success, but this also applies for other areas of life as well. If you want to copy this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.